On May 24, 2014, a Saturday, Blessie Gotingco, a 56-year-old woman, completed her workday and was heading home. She resided in North Shore, Auckland, New Zealand, with her husband of 30 years, Antonio Gotingco. Their connection traced back to their childhood in Cebu City, Philippines, where they attended the same school. Over the years, they dated, married, and had 3 children, B, Vincent, and John. In 2004, the family of 5 relocated to New Zealand. Auckland became a beloved home for Blessie, offering her opportunities to indulge in activities she cherished, such as exploration, walking, and discovering new places. She held a job that brought her satisfaction and had formed strong bonds with friends in the area. The Gotingco family embraced their life in Auckland, evident in their shared experiences and joys. Just a few days prior, on May 20th, Blessie celebrated her birthday with her children, enjoying lunch at a pub in Green Hythe and a family dinner at Urban Turban in Wynyard Quarter. Unfortunately, Antonio couldn't join them as he was on a work trip abroad, set to return on June 15th. Blessie couldn't wait to see him again. They were a very close family and were happiest when they were all together. On the 24th of May, Blessie Gotingco concluded her work at Tower Insurance at 7 p.m. Although her regular working hours were until 5 p.m., she had willingly taken on a few extra hours of overtime. Without pre-arranged transportation, as her co-worker Bahula Shah, who usually gave her a ride, had left earlier, Blessie opted to take the Birkenhead Transport's 973 bus from Lower Albert Saint to Birkdale Road. The bus stop was located approximately 700 meters from her home, and the short walk should have taken her just 5 minutes. However, that evening, Blessie never reached her destination. Upon returning home from work at 3:15 a.m. the next morning, Blessie's daughter B noticed her absence. Concerned, B contacted her 2 brothers to inquire about their mother's whereabouts, but they were unaware. In an effort to locate her, B used a Find My iPhone app and discovered Blessie's phone on a grass verge in Salisbury Road, a mere 100 yards from their home, at 6 a.m. In the vicinity of the verge, B also found Blessie's shoes and the Tupperware container she used for her daily lunch at work. When the police arrived, they initially considered the possibility of a hit and run, given the scattered nature of Blessie's belongings on the verge. They contemplated whether Blessie might have been struck by a vehicle and was now disoriented and lost somewhere. However, it became evident that a more sinister event had transpired. A young girl residing on the same street reported hearing a woman scream at the time Blessie disembarked from the bus nearest to her home. Witnesses observed a BMW car overtaking the bus carrying Blessie, leading the police to scrutinize 28-year-old Tony Douglas Robertson. When questioned, Robertson claimed ignorance about Blessie and the circumstances surrounding her disappearance. Notably, the police were already familiar with Robertson, as he had a history as a convicted sex offender and abductor. Just 5 months prior, he had been released from prison and was under an extended supervision order, complete with 24-hour GPS tracking. Robertson's movements were monitored due to the ankle bracelet GPS tracking device, which revealed his presence on the street where Blessie vanished around the same time. Investigations also revealed that he had spent time on the 24th of May at Eskdale Cemetery and returned the following day. This prompted the police to search the cemetery, where, with the assistance of a police dog, Blessie's body was discovered 2 days after her disappearance. Her remains were concealed under pine scrub, covered with foliage and debris, and wrapped in a sheet. Tragically, Blessie had been subjected to rape and fatal stabbing. Following the discovery, the police arrested Tony Robertson, charging him with rape and murder. Despite the evidence, he pleaded not guilty. The prosecution asserted that Tony, a stranger to Blessie, spotted her walking home as he drove down Birkdale Street. According to their case, he intentionally struck her with his vehicle, resulting in her leg breaking in 2 places. Allegedly, Tony then picked Blessie up, placed her in the back of his car, and drove to his Birkdale apartment just before his 8 p.m. curfew to avoid triggering any alarms. The witness testimonies aim to support this narrative. One witness testified that they observed Blessie alighting from the bus at Birkdale and walking away briskly. They also noticed a white sedan-like vehicle overtaking the bus and speeding down Salisbury Road. The court heard from an 11-year-old girl who lived on Salisbury Road. She recounted that on the night of May 24th, while she was cooking dumplings with her sister, she heard the sound of a car and a high-pitched scream at around 7:30 p.m. Her testimony detailed, "It was driving up the hill from Eskdale and it stopped. Then I heard a high-pitched scream from a lady, and then there was nothing after that." The girl added that the car then drove off in the direction of Birkdale Road. In the courtroom, the prosecution contended that upon Tony's return to his apartment, he parked his car in the garage beneath his home and proceeded to commit heinous acts against Blessie. According to their case, Tony raped Blessie, strangled her, and brutally stabbed her in a frenzied and violent manner, ultimately landing the final blow to the throat. The prosecution further argued that early the following morning, Tony wrapped Blessie's lifeless body in a bedsheet, placed it back in his car, and drove to Eskdale Cemetery to dispose of her. They suggested that this timing was deliberate, allowing Tony to avoid violating his curfew. Forensic scientists provided testimony stating that luminal testing conducted in the area where Blessie's body was discovered revealed a bloody path, indicating the likely dragging of a blood-stained object through the grass. The evidence suggested that Blessie's body had been transported through parts of the cemetery before being placed on the ground and dragged to the location where it was eventually found. Details of Blessie's injuries were presented in court by pathologist Dr. Carl Wygren. He testified that Blessie had suffered multiple deep stab wounds, with one being so violent that links from her necklace were embedded in its depths. Dr. Wygren also said that when Blessie was stabbed in the throat, it injured her windpipe. He emphasized that all of Blessie's injuries were inflicted while she was alive, as evidenced by the presence of blood in her lungs. Pathologist Dr. Carl Wygren testified that Blessie sustained numerous injuries, making it challenging to pinpoint a singular cause of death. He suggested that a combination of factors, including strangling, blunt force trauma from being struck by the car, stab wounds, and incise wounds, likely contributed to her death. Dr. Wygren expressed difficulty in attributing death to one specific injury, but opined that the stabbing probably hastened her demise. The court learned that Blessie suffered various blunt force trauma injuries, such as broken ribs, legs, teeth, and abrasions consistent with post-mortem dragging. Dr. Wygren proposed that Blessie was likely strangled first as a means of subduing her, followed by the stabbing and incise wounds. Evidence of manual strangulation was presented, including bruising on her neck, a fractured thyroid, and broken capillaries in her eyes. According to Dr. Wygren, Blessie might have survived being struck by the car with prompt medical assistance. However, instead, she sustained further injuries, including sharp force injuries, leading to significant bleeding. When questioned about defensive wounds, Dr. Wygren noted that there didn't appear to be any, explaining to the jury that such absence is not uncommon in cases where the victim succumbs to violence. Dr. Wygren also informed the court that samples from Blessie's body underwent DNA testing, revealing the presence of Tony's seminal fluid on her body. This testimony added crucial forensic evidence to the prosecution's case. The court was informed that Tony, wearing a GPS anklet at the time, had been at Eskdale Cemetery hours before the murder occurred. The prosecution argued that this indicated premeditation, contending that Tony was scouting for a location to hide a body. They asserted that he had planned the murder in advance, selecting the burial site before choosing his victim. The GPS data also revealed Tony revisited the cemetery early the next morning, leading the prosecution to believe he dumped Blessie's body at that time. Crown Prosecutor Michael Walker underscored the significance of these visits, suggesting they demonstrated that the defendant was planning to kill someone, and that the trip to the cemetery was for scoping out where to dispose of the body. The court heard that blood was discovered in Tony's car, and a knife along with some of Blessie's belongings were found buried in the rear of his property. The knife bore traces of Blessie's blood. Evidence of damage to Tony's BMW was presented in court. Detective Constable Shane Page testified that the vehicle showed recent signs of damage. A majority of the rear passenger's seatbelt was missing. When I dismantled the seatbelt, being the anchorage point, there was about a meter, I think 940 mm of the seatbelt was missing. It had been cut. Detective further testified about additional damage inside Tony's car, including cuts and scratches on the leather seating in the back. He noted a significant area of replaced foam inside the back seat and blood found on the passenger's seat and in the car's trunk. Otto Glazier told the court that on May 26th, he was summoned to Tony's residence to repair a broken BMW windscreen. He found it unusual that the windscreen had already been removed from the car, and he observed blood inside the vehicle. When he inquired about the cause of the damage, Tony claimed it happened while joking around with friends. According to Tony, a friend slipped on the bonnet and crashed through the glass. Sergeant from the serious crash unit testified that he believed Blessie was intentionally struck. He suggested that she was hit while walking on the pavement, basing his belief on the discovery of a tire imprint on the verge near where her belongings were found. In the defense's case, Tony admitted to causing Blessie's death, but asserted that it was accidental and not premeditated. According to his defense, Tony claimed to have panicked after accidentally hitting Blessie, and then inflicted the injuries found on her body to make the incident appear like a random attack. He maintained that all injuries were inflicted post-mortem. During the trial, Tony dismissed his legal team and chose to defend himself. Tony told the court that he denied the prosecution's version of events and emphasized that he panicked after the accidental collision. He argued that putting Blessie in his car and driving home was solely to comply with his curfew. "I put her straight in my car to comply with my curfew that demanded I be there at 8 p.m. and stay there until 6 a.m. Tony contended that the prosecution was wrong in asserting premeditation, emphasizing the absence of witnesses to the car accident. He explained his presence at the cemetery on May 24th and 25th by claiming he was trying to buy prohibited substances. Regarding the DNA evidence, Tony argued that it was microscopic, and scientists had difficulty isolating and testing it. The defense presented contrasting opinions on Blessie's injuries from another pathologist, Dr. Chapman, who disagreed with Dr. Wygren's findings. Dr. Chapman's report, read in court, suggested that Blessie's neck injuries, particularly the fractured thyroid, could have been caused by another blow to that area. The report stated that the bruising on Blessie's neck did not appear to be from fingertips. Dr. Chapman's differing opinion, particularly regarding the likelihood of Blessie inhaling her own blood, aligned with Tony's defense that he caused the stab wounds post-mortem to simulate a random attack. During his testimony, Tony claimed that when he placed Blessie in his car, he believed she was already dead. He asserted that he orchestrated the scene to look like a random attack due to being under the influence of methamphetamine at the time. Tony also denied the rape allegations, arguing that the DNA evidence, specifically his seminal fluid found on Blessie's body, resulted from contamination and police malpractice. However, the jury did not accept Tony's version of events and found him guilty of both rape and murder. Subsequently, Tony received a life sentence with a minimum non-parole period of 24 years, along with preventive detention for the rape. In New Zealand, preventive detention is an open-ended jail term, allowing for indefinite imprisonment or recall at any time. Tony appealed the verdict, asserting that Blessie's death was accidental and contending that the jury should have been given the option to find him guilty of manslaughter. The appeal was rejected, and a subsequent attempt at the Supreme Court also failed, as it was determined that Tony had not presented anything during the trial to indicate that a charge of manslaughter could have been considered. He was denied further leave to appeal. The revelation of Tony's criminal past after his sentencing provided a stark context to his actions. Tony had been granted name suppression during the trial, concealing his previous convictions for child sexual offenses. The details of his criminal history were kept from the jury. In 2005, when Tony was just 18 years old, he committed a heinous crime in Tauranga. He kidnapped and molested a 5-year-old girl. Acting on instinct, a local officer suspected Tony's involvement, found him with the girl, and discovered the distressing scene with the child's pants down. Tony was found guilty of 7 charges, including indecent assault and attempting to abduct 2 other children. He was sentenced to 8 years in prison for these crimes. Released in December 2013, merely 5 months before Blessie's tragic murder, Tony breached the conditions of his release twice within a short span. As a result, he was considered a danger, leading to an extended supervision order mandating a decade of monitoring and a 24-hour GPS tracking anklet. Justice Edwin Wiley, the judge overseeing this case, expressed serious concerns about Tony's propensity for harm. "I am satisfied that Mr. Robertson poses a very considerable risk indeed. I consider that it is likely that he will commit an indecency on a child under the age of 12 years, and that he will abduct a child for the purpose of sexual connection. The evidence compels the conclusion that he is impulsive, and that he is unable to control his anger and aggression. Mr. Robertson has a predilection for and a proclivity towards sexual offending. He has shown no remorse. Indeed, he continues to deny it. The tragic circumstances surrounding Tony's release, the monitoring order, and the subsequent violent attack on Blessie Gotingco caused profound pain and anger for her family. The fact that Tony, despite being monitored with a GPS anklet, was able to commit such a heinous crime added to the grief of Blessie's family, who believed that the system had failed to protect them. A government report was conducted to examine the handling of Tony's case by the police and corrections. However, the report found no fault on their part and concluded that Tony alone was responsible for Blessie. Despite the lack of blame assigned to the authorities, the report made 27 recommendations for improving the management of high-risk offenders. Blessie's husband, Antonio, expressed disappointment and devastation at the inquiry's findings, stating that he believed corrections did not have the capabilities to manage high-risk sex offenders and that, in his opinion, the offenders managed the system. The Department of Corrections minister noted that Tony had served his full 8-year prison term for the previous offense and had been denied parole multiple times due to his lack of remorse. However, residents of Birkdale, Auckland were not informed of his release into their community. In a statement released by the New Zealand police, Antonio expressed the profound loss his family was experiencing. "Blessie is the light of our home, and without her, we will be lost in darkness. Right now, we are just trying to pretend that everything is okay, but deep inside, we are brokenhearted. We have been robbed. She is gone too soon.